Hi, Sara.
Hello, Keith. How are
Salam,
you?
chiturasti, hubasti,
Good, thank
bahirasti,
John Tonjur.
bisyar tashakur, zindabushi. Let's go ahead and kick it off. Thank you for everybody who's joining, who has joined. Thank you for those who joined before and then have jumped back in as we kind of work through some of the technical difficulties. My name is Keith Alaniz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rumi Spice. Rumi Spice is a social enterprise dedicated to supporting livelihoods in Afghanistan by sourcing the world's most precious spices directly from Afghanistan farmers and supporting thousands of women through sustainable jobs in the agricultural industry. We are so excited today to speak to Ms. Sara Wahedi, the CEO and founder of Ehtesab app, Afghanistan's leading civic tech startup. Sara has a tremendous amount of accolades. She is Times 100 Women of the Year in 2022, MIT's Most Influential Women Under 35 semifinalist. Sara, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to talk to us about your journey as an entrepreneur and how you've been building Ehtesab and what that means to you, what that means to the people of Afghanistan. And just for the ground rules for everybody, we'd love to get some engagement on this Instagram Live. So if you have questions or want to sort of participate in the conversation, please feel free to do so. We want to be respectful of Ms. Sada's time, so we may not be able to get to everybody, but we'll try to bring in questions as they come. So Sada, again, Bisyar Tashakur, thank you for being here. Can we maybe start with just telling us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to start Ehtesab?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Keith. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Um, so the idea for Ehtesab came from a personal lived experience. So at the time, I was living in Afghanistan. I was working at the Office of the President. I was supporting the senior advisor on migration and social development. I was a policy aide, and I was learning. I was kind of in a learning phase of my life. And I made it very intentional to try to be within the city as much as I could. Trying to make sure that I was walking home from work, trying to make sure that I was speaking to people every day. My grandparents were there, my aunts and uncles were all there, so it was really important for me to understand what daily life in Afghanistan was like. And I've spoken about this before, but when I was walking home in downtown Kabul, now, I was about, I would say, half a block away from my house when there's a little bit of a commotion going on about some sort of vest or some sort of incident. There was a fight or something that was happening, and a few seconds later there was an explosion. And as soon as I heard it, this is like something that's very common for Afghans, especially who are living in Afghanistan before the fall. You just get yourself out as fast as you can, and then figure out the details later on. So I ran home, and then it was back-to-back explosions, 3 or 4 right after the other. And one of my friends was working at the embassy, U.S. Embassy at the time, and they had been texting me. A whole bunch of people had been texting me that there had been an explosion. But the thing was that I was literally looking at the explosion, but they were telling me that it happened, but they were miles away. And I asked them, how did you know that this was happening? Like, I'm watching it, and I have no idea that it's ISIS. I have no idea that this is the Indian visa office. And they said that we get alerts. We get text alerts because as diplomats and people in the business sphere, there was a tool called INSO, and they provide text alerts to the United Nations, to people who are in crisis areas. And it was like a light bulb moment for me, because at that time, the notion of like a reputable 911 where people could call and get information from was very politicized. You went to Tolo, you went to Twitter, to Facebook, but it wasn't like a like a citizen app or 911 or police where that information wasn't politicized. So right away it was like, okay, how do we even think about having a service like this in Afghanistan? Because at the time, I'm not sure if you probably know this, Keith, but there was maybe some of the viewers know as well. There was a Facebook group called Kabul Security Now, which had like 250,000 followers. It was a huge Facebook group, and a lot of people got information from Kabul Security Now. But the problem with Kabul Security Now was that it was like every Facebook user could go in there and just send in reports and things like that. But how did you know that that was actually verified? How did you know that you could trust those reports? So that's where Ehtesab came in, is how do we send verified, near real-time reports that aren't politicized, that's not the news, it's just, here's an explosion, stay away from the area. Or there's an electricity outage, you know, because of something not related to just bad electricity in Afghanistan, but maybe Uzbekistan had canceled, had cut their electricity, or a power line was damaged. At least you give some people that information. So it was from this very traumatic lived experience, but thankfully we're able to see how the app has unfolded today.
That's incredible. And you know, I just reflect back on my experience in Afghanistan, and I was in, you know, Wazir Khan in Kabul, you know, for a time, and I remember incidents where I think one that stands out is when the Intercontinental Hotel, one of the hotels that was being attacked, and you know, I was working with coalition forces, and you would think that, like, I mean, I think maybe the assumption is that the intel flows quickly and we know what's going on, or people know what's going on, but it's massive confusion. And so, you know, getting information from places like Twitter or from turning on Tolo News is sometimes more quick and accurate than trying to figure out from, you know, Afghan partners on the ground and the Afghan security forces and the Turkish and all the different coalition forces that were there to figure out what exactly is happening. And like you said, sometimes it was a major event, sometimes it was power down, you know, and you really don't know. And I just can imagine from a citizen perspective how confusing and disorienting that must be in your hometown. I mean, I think that it's not lost on me, and I think a lot of people that, you know, people live here and they've had to live through, you know, 20 decades of this kind of stuff, and I think that what you have provided is really groundbreaking in that way, that provides clarity of what's going on and transparency in what's happening. So I think that's really cool and really challenging at the same time. It makes me wonder, like, can you talk to a little bit about how your app has worked outside of, you know, these sort of catastrophic events? You know, how is your app working to help inform the citizens of Kabul?
So one of the most interesting examples was 2 days ago, there was an explosion in Now, and we had literally no idea. And one of my colleagues at Ehtesab said there was someone who just sent us a report in the application that there's been an explosion, and no one on Twitter had said anything, Tolo, nothing. And that was when I realized that this is really what we're supposed to be doing. It's not just us giving the alerts. It's an Afghan sitting at home who's witnessing something, who hears something, or sees a crime, or seeing a woman being harassed, and they don't feel comfortable, especially in the Talib situation right now. A lot of people have these arguments of, why don't these men stand for these women? Why don't these men support these women? It's terrifying. I'm in America right now, but I can't ever say to someone, don't just go in there and help this woman, go in there and help this person being beaten or abused, because in that moment you're acting from a place of trauma, you're acting from a place of fear. And a lot of people, you know, in a situation where I feel like, okay, I will probably get out of this alive, maybe I'll go and do something. But if I'm facing a man with a gun, I'm probably not going to go in there and do something. I'm just not that kind of, you know, sacrificial person, to be honest. But what the application does is that it gives you a safe method to report. And although we've done no advertising of the application on the ground, because of the safety of the team, because we're trying to monitor how the Talib world is unfolding, we have users who send us reports saying, hey, I'm beside an explosion right now, I wanted to let you know. And then that helps us kind of fast track working with journalists or my team who scrub data on social media to say, oh yeah, there was an explosion, let's let our users know. So one of the ways is obviously we triangulate those reports, we verify them, and we disseminate them. But one is also to inspire our users to say, look, if you see something, say something. Because visualizing that data, getting that information out, collating that information is a part of that solution-making process. So it's not just Ehtesab giving reports. It's also inspiring our users to say, here's an app. It's very easy to use. You can report anything. And we've had reports, like I said from the beginning, we had a user who reported rabid dogs that were scaring his children. And he said, this is literally a crisis in our area and we need someone to deal with this. Or I've walked past an electricity pole that's down. It might affect the electricity for the city. Just wanted to let you guys know. So and I think the more that we see our users, especially our users who are much more active, we see that interest of, I have a responsibility to engage. I have a responsibility to report. So we know that citizen engagement is real. We know that it has impact, but it's still not something that's seen as useful or something that's profitable because it doesn't have those big numbers. It doesn't have those big case studies. So it's an unfolding situation, but I think it's that citizen engagement, that user engagement that really speaks to the impact of the application.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think that, if those kind of user engagements, if the, civic leaders are, and this is probably wishful at this point, but if they're able to follow up on those with some kind of action, I mean, I think that kind of makes people feel like what they're doing is working and useful. I have so many questions, but I want to divert a little bit into, what it's like about being an entrepreneur in Afghanistan, an entrepreneur who's female. I'll tell you from my perspective, it's hard enough being an entrepreneur, period, right? And then add on that the context of doing that in the midst of, a conflict, in the midst of, portion of the population not wanting women to get an education, in the midst of the sporadic connectivity that a lot of people have in Afghanistan. And can you talk a little bit about how you navigated that in creating an app, in the middle of a war zone?
Well, it wasn't easy. I mean, I was speaking to a friend of mine. His name is Farshid Riyasi. You probably know him. He is the CEO of Netlinks, a tech company in Afghanistan. And I just proposed this idea to him. And I said, yeah, Farshid, this is my idea and this is what I'm thinking. And he was one of the few people that actually listened to me. And initially he was a little bit hesitant and he said, okay, let me think about this. Let's think about what you want to do. But number one, there's very few women entrepreneurs in Afghanistan. I think there's like 4 of us. And most of them are doing education. I think I'm the only entrepreneur or startup founder that's doing anything literally not education related right now. Or health. Actually, one of my best friends is the CEO and founder of Wise Afghanistan. That's just health tech. But there's a handful of us. And one is there's definitely a lot of pushback from, I guess, our own community. I think my male counterparts definitely are able to get support, and a lot of people, supporting them because it's kind of like, a man's world. So one is already that entrepreneurship is predominantly a man's world. That's just become the status quo. But also that there's just little to no funding when it comes to investments or things like that when it comes to such a niche and new and innovative concept. I think we have this assumption to work in areas and support things that we feel comfortable in, but not really wanting to take risks on things that are out of the box or, a little bit more innovative. But it is challenging. It's definitely a lonesome sector because the community is so small, because the Afghan situation is so tense. The focus on entrepreneurship is just not there. Right now, the focus is, kind of urgent response. And I keep reminding people that sustainability, if we want sustainability in Afghanistan through entrepreneurship, we have to be thinking long term. And we're thinking very, kind of like Band-Aid solutions. And that's going to be cyclical because the more we think about short-term projects, short-term entrepreneurship, short-term startups, we're not going to see that kind of turnaround in Afghanistan. That's just not going to happen. We need to start thinking long-term with this country, and that's not happening. But yeah, it's. I feel obviously honored to be able to work and to be able to contribute to Afghanistan, but definitely the fact that entrepreneurship and especially women's entrepreneurship is so small, it can be very isolating.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with everything you're saying, and particularly on the aspect of sustainability and doing things that are sustainable long term. And I'm not shy about my criticism of the international community's involvement in Afghanistan over 20 years, and putting billions of dollars into the economy, but essentially building an economy that was not sustainable, that was dependent on donors and donor funds. You can only imagine if that focus would have been more on building an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurs, that supports business growth in Afghanistan, how different the picture might look today. So, I mean, definitely kudos to you for braving a very challenging environment. I mean, even just starting a startup here in the U.S. is challenging, especially when you lack the networks, especially when you, are a woman or a minority, or, people without access to capital. It's very, very challenging to start a startup. And I just tremendous respect for doing so in a tough environment like Afghanistan. I want to ask you, I think that we live in a world today where, technology has kind of enabled this, working remotely, this ability to, provide value and not have to physically be in the same space. I think people don't realize how much human capital is there in Afghanistan even today. And I just want to get your thoughts on how technology is able to, help women entrepreneurs, help people in Afghanistan more generally, and what your thoughts are for the sector and Afghanistan.
Well, definitely there's a lot of human capital, especially for our team. We have 4 amazing women who work on our team, and they weren't hard to find. That's another thing that I want to keep reminding people. And I'm also collaborating on a program with ASEAL where they're trying to support 50 women in technology, so 50 Afghan women who work in different startups, Afghan startups. And they had, I think, 3,000 applicants, 3,000 young women from across Afghanistan who applied for this program. So there's definitely a lot of talent. There's definitely a lot of potential, especially when it comes to Afghan women. But it's kind of that output. How do we get this talent to be able to actually work and to do things that they love and enjoy? And that's really what we're missing, is that a lot of Afghan women don't feel comfortable working in an office anymore. And we know that that's just not safe anymore for them to actually leave their home. So how do we facilitate online remote freelance work? Or how do we promote positions where they're actually able to work safely, and not even just in a tokenistic way, but in a way that, you have a career, you're working with us, and we're going to stick with you. And like I said, a lot of these programs, especially when it comes to women and Afghan talent, is that they're very short term. It's kind of like for 4 months or 6 months or 8 months or a year, but that's really it. And that also needs to change. It's how do we kind of help them, if it's not like, we can't keep this project running forever, or this company or the startup, how do we facilitate them to move forward from that position, from that experience? And also I have a friend named Jamshed Hashimi who's running Rapid Iteration, which is an interesting company, and it's called Yagan Car, which means like it's kind of like a task rabbit, but for tech. And there's a lot of Afghan tech workers who are on that app website who are ready to get hired to make websites, to be developers, translators, whatever you want. It's this platform where you can actually go there and hire Afghan talent, and Jamshed has amazing stories of Afghans who were actually hired through Yagan Car. So there's a lot of talent. I think it's just wanting to go and find them and trying to seek out that talent.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've people talk about Afghanistan and its natural resources, but in my mind, like truly the greatest resource that Afghanistan has is its people, and it's particularly its young people. I think that what is the statistic? Like 80% of the populace is under. A very high percentage of the populace is under 30
or 25.
Yeah.
It's really young. Yeah, it's really young.
And I've just always been impressed by the young talent out of Afghanistan, because you have to realize these people have grown up in a place that has been in conflict, and yet still have resilience, and are still starting companies, and are still finding a way to make things work. And I'm really interested in Jamshed's company, and hopefully some people who are listening realize that there's all this human capital in Afghanistan that's
you can hire
great
them if you have a website. If you have a website you want to make, if you have anything, like you can hire Afghan talent, and they're reputable. They have reviews about the work that they've done. So yeah, you can actually make an impact by, or even if you don't have anything to do, you can share. Like there's this website, or there's these people who are Afghans who can get hired now. And yeah, there are ways that we can give back and support them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let me just quickly. I want to ask about. I think we've all seen in the news about the Taliban's crackdown on women's education and women's right to get an education. How do you see that evolving, and how do you see that affecting long term? I mean, do you think this is going to be a long term thing? Obviously, no one can predict the future, but what are your thoughts? What are you hearing?
No, I think it's long term. I mean, because I'm not a politician, I'm not interested in politics. I've never been. That's what I love about being a technologist, and I think probably what you love, Keith, about being an entrepreneur is that when you talk business, when you talk the reality, we don't have to sugarcoat it. I mean, I know that the Taliban, and I said this from the beginning, they were never going to change. I was reading an Amnesty report from 2001, and it went literally line by line of everything that the Taliban had banned. And it's literally stage by stage the same thing. What's left is women will be barred, will be literally like, if you don't need to leave for healthcare, for urgent care, why are you leaving your house? And I had a friend actually, I was at the UN and I was on a panel, and she was also on a panel. She's in Afghanistan. And she told me that she left to go to her office or to like an underground school that she was volunteering at. And a Talib had said, where are you going? And she said, oh, I'm just going to go see my family. And she said, well, schools are closed. You have no job. You're not allowed to work. So why are you leaving your house? Go, you can ask your aunt, your family to come to you, but why are you going to leave your home? And that is what I'm trying to get people to understand, is that the Taliban doesn't want to see women anywhere. They don't want to see them walking around. They definitely don't want to see their face. I mean, even like people are saying, oh, they're allowed to wear the hijab. That's going to change. Like, I keep saying that, where is this assumption coming from that we can trust them? Like, they are going to bring back the burqa 100%. It's just a matter of time. Whichever woman is left working is not going to work, because right now UN women, Afghan nationals who work at UN, women are not allowed to work. So if they're not even allowed to work for the UN and providing, the most urgent care, why are we assuming that they're going to change and this is going to get better? It literally can only get worse. So when it comes to education, I know that the younger girls, kindergarten to grade 6, are going to be banned eventually. They're going to say, oh, well, universities are banned, high school's banned, so really what's the use for these young girls to be going to school? So definitely primary school is next. If there's any teachers, women teachers left, they'll also be banned. And I know that I'm not giving a very positive outlook right now, but I think it's that we need to stop thinking that the Taliban is something that they're not, because they are literally showing us who they are. And what they're doing now compared to 1996 is that there was no internet, there was no Facebook, there was nothing, and no one could monitor what they were doing. If that was the case, we would be back to 1996 within 2021. The reason why it's so slow, not slow, but the reason why it is in stages is because they don't want to scare the international community, like, oh, whoa, we're back to 1996 that quickly? That this is not okay. And that will push the international community to do something, because if the world is seeing women suddenly like in burqas, women suddenly, banned from home, the international world, I feel, does have a tinge of emotion, and they'll say, whoa, I mean, what happened here? Why are there so many people wearing burqas again? So I don't see a positive light. I think, advocating, protesting, keeping the Taliban accountable, sanctioning their daughters from going to school, because right now a lot of their daughters go to school in Dubai, in Qatar. Stop allowing access to their daughters or Pakistan to have their education.
Right.
Provide them sanctions and actually stand up to them, because they're not going to change. The more we just watch, the more they're going to get away with. So we have to be strategic in ways that we respond to the Taliban. And that's really the only way. So yeah, I don't see any positive sentiment. And I think that sad conversation needs to happen, because the more we pretend, it just hurts Afghan girls and women more.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not it's a dark outlook. I definitely definitely agree with you. But you know, it also makes me think that what you're doing with Ehtesab and being able to empower people to get information out of Afghanistan, you know, the media has all but left Afghanistan and doesn't really have the ability to see exactly what's happening on the ground, which leaves an opportunity for a lot of misinformation, for a lot of propaganda, and you know, giving people, you know, the power to, through their phones, through report what's actually happening on the ground is so powerful. And I hope that our, you know, media outlets pay attention and you know, get that news out and what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, yeah, the international community, especially when it comes to journalism, when it comes to information, it has become so politicized. It's extremely difficult to get that information. So I also hope that as well. I think that's a great point, Keith. And I think, you know, for us, it's kind of like we obviously want to market the app more. But recently, there was a thread by a previous Afghan government official who said that the Taliban is working with Russia and China to basically monitor phones, any, you know, incoming kind of OTPs, which for people who are listening are, you know, kind of tech lingo, is an OTP is kind of the text message you get when you change your Instagram password, when you change your Facebook password. And basically the Taliban now has access to those texts. So let's say you say, oh, I should probably do my annual changing my password. If you live in Afghanistan, supposedly, it's not verified, but I think it could be true, that now the Taliban will have access to when you change your password, when you log into something, when you download an app, they're going to have access. So for us, that's really frightening because, you know, we need OTPs for people to log into Ehtesab. So it's kind of like a, you know, a very scary encroachment, even on technology, is that the Taliban is like, okay, we manage with the journalists. How do we manage tech? How do we manage social media? And, you know, those are the things that we have to be very cognizant of, is that there's no such thing as freedom of speech. There's no such thing as use social media at your own, you know, helm. No, it's how do we control and monitor everything.
Does Ehtesab currently, you know, users, do they require any sort of I mean, do you as a company require any sort of approval to work in Afghanistan? Or is there any ability for the Taliban to shut down Ehtesab, you know, via, I don't know, just controlling the servers?
That's a great question. So no, I mean, okay, we can work in Afghanistan because we work kind of in the cloud. We have an office, but we don't go to that office because it was raided the first day. We are under the umbrella of Netlinks. So Netlinks is an Afghan tech company. We are one of their subsidiaries or one of their investments. So we are under the Netlinks branch. So that's another reason why we have to be careful with our marketing and what we do, is because we also don't want to put Netlinks under in danger. But yeah, so long story short, we're able to work there, but because of the fact that my team is all over the country working anonymously, it helps us to get our daily workout without them kind of finding out who we are. That's why I'm like the face that everyone sees, unfortunately. I would love for people to see more faces from Ehtesab, like my colleagues who are amazing, but for their safety, I'm really the only one who can speak and who can talk to the press and to do all these things, because I have to keep my team safe. So they're there, they're working hard, they're the ones who do all the app work, they're amazing, but for their safety, they're basically invisible. Kind of like invisible superheroes.
Yeah, that's incredible, the work they're doing behind the scenes, you know, and keeping the app running and verifying things on the ground. It's really, I mean, it's brave. It's brave for people to continue to work in this space. I think we're sort of nearing the end of time, but I kind of want to just talk a little bit, and I'll share my feelings here. You know, I want to talk a little bit about what we can do, you know, because we have a lot of people joining from the U.S. What can people in the U.S. do? And let me go ahead and start, because I think my frustration is that I see not a lot of I see a lot of rhetoric and a lot of talk from the UN, from the American government, but there's virtually nothing that's actually being done, you know, to support women's rights, to support what we, you know, would have liked to seen in Afghanistan after 20 years. And it's frustrating every time I see something like that come out, where, you know, something happens and there's like a condemnation and it's just words, right? It's just rhetoric. But these are just, you know, the American people are much more than the government, just like as the Afghan people are much more than the government. You know, and so what, as a U.S. citizen, can we do to stay engaged, to support the people of Afghanistan? Yeah, that's. I want to get your opinion here.
I mean, this is kind of like a little bit cheesy to say, but I think it actually is very serendipitous that we're having this conversation because, as I had mentioned, let me just actually close my window because it's like way too much. Yeah, there's construction going on. It's New York City. So for those of you guys who are watching, there's actually a funny story about how I know Keith. So before I stopped everything, I was working for a magazine called Business DNA. If you're in Afghan and you know what Business DNA is, let me know because it's like such a small thing. So I was working for Business DNA. I was a writer, and I was one of the people who were like, we have to talk about the spice market. We have to talk about the dried fruits and nuts market because it's like almost like $1 billion industry at that time. Like it was huge. The thing that we were exporting from Afghanistan was dried fruits and nuts and spices. And so I told my team, I said, we need to write about this market. And the first thing that I searched saffron, I searched dried fruit, nuts, and the first thing that came up was Rumi Spice. And one of my jobs was to write an article about Rumi Spice. And lo and behold, like 4 years later, 5 years later, I'm talking to you about this. And I think the reason why I said, what can Americans do is that you can elaborate on this, Keith, but I'm like, you hire and you work with and you collaborate with Afghan women, with Afghan farmers in Afghanistan, and you're also a B Corp company and literally just buying your products and keeping women. I mean, you could talk about the parameters about how the farmers are working safely, but I think there are a lot of Afghan based companies that are supporting Afghans through the economy, which is huge. I mean, more than you donating for something like aid driven, try to find products in your daily life that are that are kind of supporting the Afghan economy in this very difficult state. So perhaps you can elaborate on that, but I think that's actually how I've been thinking about how could we actually sustainably help Afghans is, what are the businesses that are still running? How are they helping women? How are they helping women sustainably, or even Afghans in general? And how can you help them in your daily life? So yeah, I was thinking like we're literally talking about Rumi Spice, so that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, thanks, Sara. And that's very serendipitous. And when we started, it was about catalyzing economic development in the rural areas where the international community had just totally not paid attention to. And it was all the money was going to Kabul, to Herat, to Mazar Sharif, and 85% of the populace live in these rural areas. Afghanistan has tremendous produce, tremendous human capital. So it's really just about creating a market for Afghanistan products. And by doing so, you're not offering a handout, you're offering a hand up, and you're creating a sustainable business that can help the Afghan people. And, my sort of philosophy at the end of the day, like economic disparities are a lot of the root causes of instability. And when people don't have an option, when they don't have a way to support themselves, to support their families, they have no outlooks. It makes it very easy for them to slip into radicalization on either side, right? And we see the same thing happening here in the U.S. all the time, and you see microcosms of that in different cities across the U.S. and it's especially true in Afghanistan. But I will say I think that beyond like supporting Afghan economy through your purchases, which I think is great, and thank you for mentioning that. There's other companies too, like Combat Flip Flops does a great job of hiring people in Afghanistan to produce products, and I hope other companies come along. I think the other piece is that the narrative about Afghanistan is often written by other people and not by Afghans themselves, such as you. So I think it's important for us to listen to Afghan voices, to Afghan women voices, both here and in Afghanistan. And one thing that I want to do as I want to leverage our brand to be able to, I keep using this word empower, but to empower Afghans to use their voice, to be able to, for people in the U.S. to hear directly from Afghans and see what's going on, what's life like, and to not think of Afghanistan as some like esoteric place of war and terrorism and opium or the Taliban, but realize the beauty of the Afghan people and all the value that they have to bring to the world. So I know we've gone over time. I just want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank you.
I'm okay. You
if you want, we can keep talking if you have more time and people want to continue to to engage. Well, okay, maybe that was a good way to end, but let's have like a encore. I want to continue talking because I think that let me set the stage like this, because starting this company Rumi Spice, and we tried to seek investment for Rumi Spice, and granted it's not as challenging as doing it with a company that's coming out of Afghanistan, but when you talk in front of investors, you always have to answer the question, like, what happens if the Taliban take over? This is pre 221, right?
Yeah.
And now the Taliban have taken over, right? And what I said would happen has happened. We're just doing business in Afghanistan. We have nothing to do with the Afghan government, the previous government or the current government, and we'll just continue doing business as usual, trading value for value, right? I can imagine with Ehtesab, you had similar challenges, not just in trying to monetize and raise money or get support. I mean, you're a nonprofit, so I mean, it's not really about getting. It's maybe not the same kind of dynamic as getting VC investment, but then even just the purpose of the app itself. Mm-hmm. How has that sort of changed from pre 2021 to now? And then maybe we could talk about like what happened during the fall, and what you saw through your app and your engagement.
So before 2021, it makes me very sad, because no one except for Afghans who were in Afghanistan, especially the youth, yourself and others, if you were in Afghanistan before 2021, you knew how excited people were. Even though there was so much despair, at that time, obviously we know now that the Taliban was encroaching so quickly, but the youth, because they're such a big part of the kind of entrepreneurship tech world, we were so hopeful. I mean, we were like, this is our country, and we're giving back, and there's a lot of hope. And no one will ever see that. There was very little, kind of news or anything about Afghanistan at that time. It was kind of like a little bit of a lull. There was the occasional, there was an explosion today in Afghanistan, but that was really it. But the youth were very, very, hopeful, and we were all, working together, especially with Ehtesab. There was a lot of excitement within our team because, we were thinking, okay, there's a huge gap in information here. We can do something. We could be kind of like the citizen of the country. We could work with the government. We could keep government officials accountable. We could do kind of algorithmic based connecting when it comes to voting. We could help people make more informed votes, because Ehtesab is a branch. So it's a civic tech startup. So underneath Ehtesab, we were hoping to have different products or initiatives. Like, one is the Ehtesab app, which is for security and information. But I also wanted to design a website that would help people make an informed vote, because right now in Afghanistan, well, not now, but before, people would kind of be like, hey, my uncle's running for parliament, or this person is from our tribe, or this person is from our family, vote for them. And that was kind of how people voted in Afghan elections. It wasn't what's your platform, what are you interested in, it was who's your grandfather, who's your tribe, who's your whatever. And that was another problem about the government, was that people didn't feel like their officials were actually working for them. So these were really the innovative ideas we were thinking at Ehtesab, which was, how do we really change the psyche of our country? How do we change the way that we think about governance? And, so even if it's how people always say, like, I get comments on Twitter and stuff like, why did you build an app? This is Afghanistan. Well, the thing was that before 2021, if you looked at the numbers, the trajectory or the estimation was that 75% of Afghans would have a smartphone by 2025. This was because India had similar numbers, and the phones, the Huawei, the A series, Samsung, were so cheap. Like, you could get them for $60, $70, and especially with the economy, we were assuming that eventually people could make not iPhones or the Galaxy series, but you could get a cheap smartphone that could do Facebook, texts, internet browsing. So that's why we built the app. That's why we didn't do like a short code or a 911, is because we were like, this is the upward trajectory, let's follow it. So that's why we built the app. Then August 2021 came, and it was like I will literally never forget that day. It was so shocking and so traumatic, because I was in Canada at the time. I had just left Afghanistan like a few weeks before that, and I was getting ready for school. I was getting ready to start Columbia. I was like, I'm going to go back literally in December. I'm going to go back during my holidays. I'm going to go back to Afghanistan in December 2021, and the whole year after that, my family's there, you know, whatever. But then it was, and Ehtesab was doing monitoring alerts, and it was like 10 a.m. and it was 2 in the morning in Canada or something, and we got a report that the Taliban will be in Kabul by 5 in the morning. And I was having an interview with the Globe and Mail in Canada at the time, and I listened to that voice clip from this from the security official who was kind of monitoring and giving us intel for Ehtesab. And he said, yes, Sarah, so the Taliban's coming. They're going to enter the city by 5. They've just gone to Pulcherhi prison, and they're going to release the prisoners, and they're going to come to Kabul. And I started laughing. I actually started laughing because I said, how are they going to come to Kabul? I mean, the U.S. Embassy, the embassies, the UN, like, how would they storm the capital? And then it was, I woke up, and we started seeing the flags, like the Talib flags, and we were monitoring reports at that time. The U.S. Embassy had like a reporting method, and they were sending alerts to people saying, okay, Talib seen at the border of Kabul province. And that's when we started getting scared. We were like, okay, well, when are the Americans going to start coming into, when is, you know, who's going to stop the Taliban from coming into the border? And we were literally monitoring, my team, like, okay, they're coming in, they're coming in, they're coming in. And we got to the point where it was like, I said, you know, do we evacuate the office? You know, should we shut down the app? And I was like crying. I was crying so hard, and I was like, I can't believe the Taliban is in Kabul. What the heck is going on? And my teammate said, look, right now, INSO just shut down. UN alerts shut down. The U.S. Embassy is evacuating. We need to keep going. We need to keep going. We're Afghan based. We're all Afghans. We have to keep the app running. We have to keep the website running. And I kid you not, Keith, that day when the Taliban came into Kabul, everyone evacuated. Everyone evacuated. But my team, we were still like, okay, let's do what we can. Let's monitor what we can. Let's send out alerts. I will never forget that day. And that's when everything just collapsed. The next day, the Taliban came to our office. They raided it, and that's when my team decided to work from home. And we have been work from home for 2 years now. So it's a traumatic memory, but post 2021, we're struggling. You know, we're just kind of taking it day by day. But it was a horrible day for us. But it kind of emboldened us to keep working. But yeah, it just goes to show that day what happened, and that's really that kind of a lot of our dreams were tarnished and a lot of our dreams were dashed. But I would say right now the momentum is more like, we had our time to grieve. How do we move forward now? Like, how do we work within these parameters? And that's kind of my team, and a lot of Afghan youth are like, okay, how do we get past this? How do we work in this environment?
That's so inspiring. I mean, I can't empathize completely with you. I'm not Afghan, but I spend a lot of time there, and of course connected with my partners on the ground. And I remember getting the text as Mazar fell. Yeah. And that was, as Herat city fell, and I was shocked, you know. Yeah. And then just how rapidly that 7 days later, you know, Kabul falls, and how rapidly that transpired. And
we were thinking it was going to be months. I remember that time they were like, oh, it'll take, you know, 3 to 6 months for them to get to Kabul, and it was literally 7 days.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about that, maybe for another Instagram live, how that whole thing went down, and you know, the role that the information, disinformation, or, you know, lack of information played and sort of snowballing that rapidly.
We should do a podcast, literally, like not just episode by episode, because there's just so much about this, especially misinformation, especially about, you know, the things that we were hearing as Afghans, like everything's fine, everything's totally okay, the Taliban's not going to get to Kabul, that's definitely not going to happen. And how it just, you know, like wildfire, how misinformation just took over. Yeah.
And I'll say this. I think that the U.S. based media did a lot to propagate the propaganda that the Taliban were pushing out, and that did a lot to collapse morale
Yeah.
But anyway, that's for another
Yeah.
for another podcast. But let's I mean, I just take it back. Like, again, entrepreneurship is hard enough, right? There's ups and downs in entrepreneurship, but I think if any of the if there's any entrepreneurs here like listening to this, I just get so much inspiration because there's tough times for everybody in running a company, right? I mean, just can you imagine doing it in the middle of what you had to go through, and to have that resilience to come out the other side, and just to continue building. You've had your time to grieve, and now you're continuing to build, and it's incredible. I like what you said about being informed about voting and who you're who you're voting for, and it made me think like, man, I wish there was an Ehtesab app here in the U.S. because I think people instead of voting for their particular tribe could do well to understand the issues and vote on being an informed voter.
Because honestly, I was thinking, like, let's say you just like you had like a completely like empty slate, and you were like, an app or a website asked you, okay, what are you passionate about? Okay, education. Like in my county, education really sucks. And then after you do the survey, it ends up like you get like a Democrat, and then you realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have just done like a knee jerk, or a Republican, whatever it is.
Right.
But if it's not just like every Republican I'm voting for or every Democrat I'm voting for, like what if we went in invisibly and started like doing these surveys where, okay, who are you? What are you interested in? And that's what I wanted to do for Afghanistan. But it's like I said, we are so focused on things that have nothing to do with social impact, that have to do with like just the social good, about being better citizens, about being nicer to each other, about being healthy people. All of the technology that's really being invested in is really to kind of like really dumb down our brains, to be honest. We're not really seeing anything that makes us better, that makes us smarter, that makes us more efficient. Like my attention span has dwindled so much because of social media. I mean, I'm scrolling, I'm reading, and a friend was telling me like, your eyes go from page to page really quickly. And I wasn't like that. I was usually really into absorbing content, but I think it's that everything we're investing in, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, we're being pushed as entrepreneurs. Like, what's the, kind of the profit in this? What's like the turnaround when it comes to profit? What do you bring to us to the table? And I keep saying like, I don't know, a more sustainable planet, better, health. And that's just like, that's not interesting to people. Like, I don't care about bettering human society. It's like, I want the profit now. And that's scary. That's really scary. Like if I don't build an Instagram or a TikTok or something, I'm not of value. Like how many more TikToks, how many more Instagrams do we really need? What are we really doing to feed our souls? What are we doing to feed our minds? It's really unfortunate. But I'm glad that some markets, like the book market, for example, is like flourishing, because I think people want an escape. They want to read something. They want to just go to another world. So I don't know.
There's like this backlash of this sort of technology-driven, profit-driven ADD that everybody's been, sort of, over the years, kind of their attention spans. Like, I mean, myself, I find it harder to read a book than it was, 5 years ago because of the way that we get used to consuming information. And, I think that there's an opportunity for what, like something, like what you're doing with Ehtesab, and informing people. And now you have technologies like the GPT technology and the AI that's coming out, that there is an opportunity for people to leverage this technology to inform citizens in a non-partisan, non-biased way, just factual.
Yeah.
But I think what gets me is that, like, unfortunately, that like you got to find the profit in that, right? Because like no one's going to invest in that if there's not profit. And I think that that's what's causing a lot of the polarization. We see it here in the U.S., obviously, but the same thing. The same thing was happening in Afghanistan. Is probably still happening in Afghanistan and other countries around the world. Polarization profits, right? Like you can make money. You can sell commercials to people who are engaged and just soaking up whatever you're putting on TV. So sensationalism, polarization, and profits. And part of my frustration with the way the U.S. media covered Afghanistan over 20 years is that it was the sensationalism that drove viewers, drove clicks, drove people to read an article and click on an ad.
Yeah.
And so the things that got reported were the bombings. The things that were reported were the catastrophic events, not the entrepreneurs who are starting
Yeah.
apps in Afghanistan, not the, saffron growers who are supporting their families.
Yeah.
That wasn't driving enough clicks, but what happens when you start reporting like that? When our supposedly unbiased news organizations start reporting like that, you start incentivizing that behavior because that helps the information campaign of the Taliban, right? So I mean, I think that there's some responsibility that media organizations have to not just go straight for profit and clicks, but to go for truth. And I think that something dramatic has to happen to sort of shake up this industry to where people can monetize truth and unbiased news and profit. And until that happens, I don't know which direction things are going to continue to go. But misinformation is just a huge problem,
Yeah. I mean, one of the I think the sentiments to this, and someone said this to me yesterday, which just blew my mind. It was that, I think the reason why ChatGPT and a lot of these things are so popular now is because there isn't like a person connected to it. They have this assumption that it's a robot that's doing everything for them. And there's no, bias or anything like that, because people are so frustrated with identities and information. Like an identity, a person, especially journalists or media, like 10, 20 years ago, the New York Times, the majority of people, even if they didn't like the kind of like more democratic leaning New York Times, you didn't question whether the New York Times was fake news.
Yep.
That wasn't a thing. Now
Right.
you do that. And the worst thing is that they're leveraging on that. Instead of actually becoming platforms where people do actually trust them, we are seeing such polarization. And I think ChatGPT and Ehtesab and a lot of these platforms, I think that the interest in them is because we're not like, I'm not a journalist. And I keep telling people I'm not a journalist. That's not what I do. I'm a technologist. And for me, it's how do I get this information to you without any sort of political perspective whatsoever. I'm not interested in telling you that, the Taliban is really anti, whatever, this ethnicity, and they're going to go attack. I don't care about that. An actual physical thing happened. An explosion happened here. My job is to get that information to you, and your job is to give me information. Your job is to basically say, look, thank you very much. Okay, now I'm telling you that an electricity pole is out. That visualization of that information is, I think, going to be the key. I think people are really tired of reading something, whether they're left-leaning, right-leaning, whatever group they're in. There's an anxiety right now of, what am I absorbing, and who wrote this, and why did they write this, and what's the reasoning behind that. So I think the interest with ChatGPT is like, this is working for me with specific information, and it doesn't have this kind of subconscious that's giving its own, opinion, but the thing that people need to understand is that ChatGPT is basically running on an archive. It's not this brain that can be like, yeah, oh, I'm thinking for myself in this moment. It's going to a library of billions and billions of data points and trying to make something for you. So its data is really old. I think like 2021.
21, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it has no idea about anything, that's happened after 2021. So, yeah, it's interesting, but there's still a lot to do. Like it's ChatGPT is really interesting, but when you actually look at the kind of tech aspect of it, you're like, yeah, it's running on really basic information. Like what's happened after 2021 to 2023, a lot has happened. So,
yes, yeah.
But it's an interesting outlook of what's going to happen in the future.
If I went to ChatGPT to prepare for an interview with you, it would not even realize that the government fell. And
my friend told me that because we were just kind of interested about how it kind of understands humans, and so I put it. I was like, okay, who is Sara Wahedi? And it was like, she is at an American university in Beirut or something, and it was giving me, or she's also a researcher at something, and I was like, that's not who I am at all.
Yeah.
But if you feed it more information, it's interesting. Then it will kind of say, oh, it'll link words, but like you said, it's nothing older than 2021. It won't be able to find any information.
Well, I hope it at least brings into popular consciousness the power of, algorithmic, artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced analytics, and I think that, the average non-tech person, right, may not understand the power, lost my phone, may not understand the power of what you have with Ehtesab, right, and like what the potential could be, as engagement continues to increase and as you get more users on the platform, then you could start, taking all these data points and projecting out trends, being able to kind of judge, for example, service delivery and the effectiveness of, projects, etc., monitoring projects. I mean, I just the world of applications are out there for this platform that you built. I think there's just so much potential, and you know, I'm excited for what's going to come of this app. And I think civic tech in general is going to, you know, see its day in the sun as people start realizing the power that you can have with the data when you empower people with their cell phones that everybody's carrying around to be information and eyes and ears on the ground. So I mean, it's really cool, really, you know, it's really innovative what you built in such a difficult environment, you know, and it doesn't get harder than that. So
yeah,
it's really cool.
We're managing as best we can.
Yeah. Well, all right. I really appreciate this conversation. This has been a lot of fun. Let's talk about this podcast that we're going to do, because I have so much more to talk about.
Yeah, there's definitely a podcast in that needs to be in the works.
Yeah, but again, thank you. Thank you for joining. Let's just end. We'll both go. I'm going to put you on the spot and you can go first. What are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the fact that we will learn from this experience. I think that second round, like, it's kind of like fool me once, whatever, fool me twice, shame on me. I think after this experience, it will embolden Afghans to start taking seriously the future of our country. I think that this Talib regime has showed people that if it's not citizen-led, if it's not led by us, especially the youth in this next generation, we're always going to be fed these kinds of regimes. So I'm optimistic about the fact that we've learned that nothing has changed, and it will only embolden us to find a solution. And I think for me, my job is really to say to people that, you know, we are able to change our country. We are able to change the narrative, but we have to work together. We have to stop thinking emotionally. We have to start thinking strategically and start thinking long term. Because as we've seen with the Taliban, all of the good things that we've done over the last 2 decades are gone. And are we going to, you know, accept that? No, we need to figure out a way to say that any future government, because it's going to happen. On average, every Afghan regime lasts about, I think, 8 to 9 years. So it's going to change. The Taliban is not going to be here forever. But what are we going to do? What parameters are we setting in to be able to respond to this regime and to ensure it never happens again? And really stop thinking emotionally about the country, you know, especially when it comes to governance, especially when it comes to the people who lead our country, and to start thinking emotionally and say, look, we want a sustainable Afghanistan. We want to stop seeing a regime change every 10 to 20 years. So I don't think we'll be making the same mistake again. I truly believe that. And I believe that this next generation will be emboldened to rise up. And I think it's also time for the last generation to take a seat, because we're all a little bit tired of their political games. And I think through Ehtesab, I'm going to do what I can, but also, especially with the youth, just to keep reminding them of just how much they've gone through. They were born through 2 decades of war, and to say, you know, it's time for you to take ownership of your country and elevate those voices of change in the country right now. So what about you? What are you? What are
that's
you
so well said.
About?
Mine's similar. You know, I think that having worked in Afghanistan for, you know, going on 13 years now, I've always been incredibly impressed by the people of Afghanistan. Just the warmness, the hospitality. I think, you know, world renowned, obviously, for that. But I am even more impressed as I've started this company and as we've grown by the talent that's in Afghanistan across the board, and especially with the youth. I think the young people in Afghanistan have access to technology. I don't think that that's going to be easy to take away.
No.
And their learning curve is so much accelerated from, you know, their older generation in Afghanistan. So with access to information and, you know, with access to the ability to even just learn remotely, just learn on your phones, and the hunger that the Afghan people have to learn and improve, I think that I have just so much optimism for, even though there's going to be this we're in a dark period in Afghanistan now, but just the resiliency and the hope and resiliency that exists in the Afghan people is something that cannot be extinguished. And I think that, you know, I'll hope to continue doing what we're doing with Rumi Spice in agriculture.
Absolutely.
And helping people but I am ready for the day when, you know, people can really unlock the true potential of Afghanistan and its people. And you can see, you know, in tech and other sectors, and you can see what the country and the people of Afghanistan are capable of. So I'm very optimistic for the youth and their future.
Agreed.
Well, I think that we've sort of exhausted our time. Thank you for staying on so long. It's such a great conversation. I hope to meet when we're in New York. Next time I'm in New York, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to help out. You know, and happy to have, you know, conversations offline and you know, do whatever we can to help you be successful. Thank you so much for being here.
To our viewers, thank you for staying. I think there's like a 20 or 25 of you who have really been sticking through this hour, but make sure to follow Rumi Spice and Ehtesab and check in, because maybe we'll do one of these again. It seems like talking about this stuff is quite interesting.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you, everybody that's joined, and please just stay engaged with what we're doing with Ehtesab, with Rumi Spice, and just what's happening in the world, particularly with Afghanistan. You know, people are still there. We're still trying to support the Afghan people, and again, you being here is kind of a testament to the willingness of people to engage with the world around them, and in particular with Afghanistan. So, okay, with that said, thank you very much. Thanks to our viewers. Thanks to Jen, who set this all up for us. And, you know, especially thank you, Sara. I really appreciate your time and your conversation.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for facilitating. It was amazing. I had such a wonderful time. I didn't know that hours could pass so quickly. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
It's great.
Thank you,
all
everyone.
Right. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Sure.